on this episode of Clone Talk.
This is the thing that anybody listening to this needs to write down, is that cannabis cares about 1 micron and up. All of your problems related to cannabis are 1 micron and up. If you were a 1 micron particle and you were looking at the edge of a piece of paper, like the part you get a paper cut on, if you were looking at the edge of the piece of paper, that would be like you in your human size looking up the Empire State Building. Mold has spent 450 million years being an opportunist. So, and its replication rate is like downright evil. I just want to see a balance in like the ability to find the research and how to cultivate this in a standard fashion with the highest level of efficiency around to produce a consistent result.
Hey team, Clone Coach here. Are you tired of struggling with your clones? Slow rooting times, purple stems, yellow growth, damping off, and so much more. Now, wherever you are in the world, the best tool to have in your nursery are the Clone Coach SOPs. These SOPs provide step-by-step instructions and expert guidance to get you the best clones ever. Join the team today at clonecoach.com. The past, present, and future of cannabis nurseries through the eyes of industry professionals. Today's episode, we have Jason joining us. Jason, how are you?
How are you? Good to be here. Thank you.
Excellent, man. Excellent. Where are you joining us in from today?
I am in beautiful Rochester Hills, Michigan. I actually, funny enough, am what you would call a Michigrant, if you will. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and at a certain point, housing markets turned into just cheaper housing, good, clean living. Have a lot of clients out here already, so it was like just kind of seemed to work, and so we packed up the wagons and headed east.
When was that? Was that recent, in the last few years, where everybody else kind of made big changes, or?
No, I'll tell you what. We're just coming up on our first year here in Michigan, so this is like my first like Michigan weather. I'm looking towards my window, the first experience with like genuine snow. Like I was joking with my friends in LA. I was saying, remember that stuff we used to spray in the corners of our windows to make it look like the windows were frosted over? I'm like, do you know they do that here for free?
Yeah,
It comes with the house.
That's hilarious. That's funny. I mean, there's a big industry of cannabis in Michigan, so it's like why all these states are popping up, so it gives people the option to make those changes, that reflect their reality of day-to-day life, and stuff. So that's a good move.
Well, yeah, and it's a funny contrast having come from LA, where weed game's been around for forever, right? I mean, they say that whatever happens on the West Coast kind of migrates east, from like the perspective of methodologies and technologies and stuff like that for the cannabis industry. It is a stark contrast out here in Michigan compared to California, because I guess in California, it's like it's pretty much all warehouse space. So people, and it was a lot more gangster, so nobody wanted to be found. And you still have a lot of that legacy industry, currently operating in the city, versus when Michigan came out online, like they operate much more loud and proud. You know what I mean? They're much more out in the open. They're much more concerned about, which we'll obviously get into. I handle microbe control, but they're more into like being ahead of their problems and stuff like that. I had a lot of clients in LA, but it was still a very secretive industry compared to like everybody out here kind of already knows their neighbors. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's touching on cannabis. When did cannabis really become a part of your life, like for good?
Oh man, I got to tell you, I was a relatively late bloomer when it came to beginning to experience cannabis and like experiment with it. Growing up, I bought the DARE program, hook, line, and sinker. And then at some point in high school, yeah. Oh man, one of my cringier moments, and thank goodness the technology wasn't around to record it, was I guess like in the 6th grade, I was the guy that wrote the DARE play. You know what I mean? Like it was just
Yeah.
Uh, but so then I run into a friend of mine, and it's funny. My first like really positive experience with cannabis after a friend of mine introduced it to me because I guess he got it from his dad, and he was like, "I learned it by watching you." Um, you know, I remember I had this rival in high school named Andy Rileman. Andy Rileman was just, he was just kind of jerky to me, and I was jerky to him, and we just sort of always clashed. It was what it was, right? And then one day, towards the end of our senior year, a few days left from senior year, I catch him in the parking lot smoking weed in the school parking lot on school grounds. And in my mind, there's a calculation there. There's like, A, I get this guy. He's not getting his diploma. I got him dead to rights. I won. And then option two, let's go join him. Maybe we can put this shit to rest. We're about to go be adults, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so he saw me, I saw him, I walked to him, I could see the fear in his eyes, and I was like, Andy, chill, bro. Can I get a hit? He's like, absolutely. And we sat in his car, we smoked weed together. And
Wow.
after years of rivalry, we walked away shaking hands, and unfortunately, other than maybe some Facebook posts, I've never seen him since.
Yeah, but I mean the power of cannabis that just joins people together. It's that
It is
commonality that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like thankfully I was never one of those like immunocompromised people or had medical issues that necessitated it. I mean, I was not a patient at the time that I was learning, to do
Mm.
this stuff. But at the same time, politically speaking, there's just no reason for it to be illegal. That's probably a whole topic for a whole other show. But I mean, at the end of it, it definitely it brings people together. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, how many people do cocaine in a circle?
Yeah, I don't know,
Right?
man. It's funny. I was just in Vegas for the MJ BizCon, and I'm in a taxi.
Right.
And I'm stopping at a stoplight, and there's a group of about maybe 8 to 10 guys that are like from a different country, probably like
Mm-hmm.
Indian or something, and you could tell like it's new to them, right? But they're all like at this like, little spot off to the sidewalk, and they have one joint, and there's like one guy in the middle that's like the leader, that's like done this before. Then you have like the rookies, but everybody's just like taking this hit, and like you saw the look on their face immediately, just like they were calm and cool, and they brought them together, and they're like, this is like a whole new world. You could see it in their eyes, man.
I mean, listen, even in just the to be greedy about my own high, I always notice that I get a lot more stoned when I'm smoking with somebody versus smoking by myself.
That's interesting. So, I mean,
Yeah.
real quick, how did I mean, there was a lot of propaganda, stigma attached to cannabis, growing up, for all of us, really. So, was there any times that cannabis propaganda affected you during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had parents that were very anti cannabis, even though they smoked it in their heyday, right? When
Mhm.
it was actually more like hay, right?
Quite
But
literal.
yeah, right. They had to grind up the sticks and the leaves and all that crazy, right? But yeah. So I had that growing up. It was like culturally, not like I'm from any specific culture. I mean, I'm as white bread as they come. But um, like it just, like there was the propaganda was I was born into the propaganda. You know what I mean? So and then but then the other side of it is, man, is like the more you get educated and the more you start to like kind of peel the layers of the onion back and the world that you live in, and you start to realize things that like part of the reason of prohibition had more to do with like the politics and the finances and the business of people that own forest land versus people that own hemp fields, and how at one point we were legally required to grow a certain amount of hemp per farmland, and
Yep.
all
Riddle
these
me
other
that.
things. Oh yeah, that was a thing way back
Yeah.
when.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's just fascinating to like see like that awakening when I was like, man, I have been buying this hype, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
and that was what sort of changed it for me, and so I've always been a big proponent of like education and knowing about exactly what you're getting into, and the larger implications in the world and how it affects people around you, and yada yada yada. So I mean, I watched, what was it, Reefer Madness. I thought it was a comedy, right? I mean, but somebody back in the 30s was like, "Oh my God, clutching their pearls,"
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean that's the reality of it. But luckily now as a society, we've transitioned so much to where not only do we not need to hide about what we do, about what we're passionate about, we could speak openly about it with even strangers. And previously, you would say it to a stranger, and they'd be like, "Gasp! Wow, get away from me!" And now it's like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, I have a nephew that does that," or they have some
Hmm.
sort of connection or tie to it, and or you could speak openly enough about it to where people that could really
Hmm.
benefit from the medical side of it are actually open to trying it now and getting relief. So that's like
I would,
a huge,
yes,
huge
completely
change.
agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. In fact, it's funny because, like, being somebody that works in the cannabis industry, perceptions are reality sometimes with people, especially like the civilians, right? So
Mhm.
I have a lot more in the last few years. I've had a lot more friends and family and associates of all kinds come to me for advice around, like, I want to get into this. What should I get into? What should I look out for? Do I need to
Yeah.
worry about, like, the bathtub gin of weed? Like,
Right.
what's the dosing? What's the difference between THCA and THC? Delta 8, Delta 9. Like, not that I know all those answers, but at the end of the day, like, people, have been coming to me as thinking that I'm an authority in that, and I'm never gonna, like, give them an answer that I don't fully stand behind. So there are plenty of times where I'm like, call the manufacturer, like, or
Yeah.
email these people and ask them, like, if you're looking at a specific CBD brand, they should have certificate of analysis reports that you can look at, so you can see they're consistently passing their microbe tests and their purity tests, or what have you.
Yep.
So anyway, but yeah, the larger impact on society and culture has relaxed it a lot, to the point where now I got my mom, who was busting my balls about smoking weed when I was younger, now is like, "You got anything I can take home with me when she comes and visits?" You know what I mean? I'm like, "What?"
I do know what you mean. I mean, growing up, my family was the same way. They ate into the propaganda and the stigma. I'm Mexican, and there's a phrase called that they would use, like, called marihuano, which is basically like a drug addict with cannabis, but someone that was just throwing themselves, doing nothing with their lives and stuff. And through my years of being an advocate and a patient, and really being, this being my passion, now
Mm-hmm.
my family members, they've had their own experience with cannabis when they had ailments, and I was there to provide them something, and they saw the benefits, firsthand,
Yeah.
and now they became advocates as well. So that's just the beauty of it, man. But let's
Yeah,
transition
I gotta tell you,
to
my
a
uncle
little bit.
Mike, my
Yeah.
uncle Mike makes an amazing salve out of, like, all of his leaves. He used to ship it to us when I lived in LA. I would pass it around. I had a boss at my last job before I started working at Filtr. I was at Spectrum King LED, and my boss, like, I gave him some of Uncle Mike's salve, and he had, like,
Hmm.
chronic knee problems, and he put it on, and he's like, "Listen," he's like, "it's not a cure, but it definitely took my pain from, like, a 9 down to a 3." And it's like, and he's like, "It's a net improvement. I felt good walking to my car, for at the end of the day." And
Yeah. It's like,
so,
what else can you ask for at that point, right? It's like there's relief.
right, yeah, and that's the thing, that what's nice about the loosening of restrictions around cannabis is it's allowing for more research.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like we don't have the pharmaceutical companies and, like, the paper industry and the clothing fiber industries are becoming less in the pockets of, the people, the policymakers, right? Basically, all the old, mean, rich white people are starting to die off, right? And so, I think that you're going to start to see a lot more research, not just even necessarily on the medicinal benefits of it and how it can be a substitute for a lot of other things that have, like, more, like, riskier side effects, but also like there needs to be more research in the actual agricultural production of it. So you can find all sorts of research articles on the science of growing corn and all the different sciences behind growing wheat. But like I was trying to research the benefits or detriments of bipolar ionization against cannabis plants, and the only thing, like the 10 pages of Google results, was all bipolar mental disorder, which I applaud, and I'm all for that research. But there's no balance in like it. You know, the benefit doesn't. How do I say this? The benefit is nebulous if the production of it isn't consistent. You see what I'm saying? Like, in other words, if you can make it the same way every single time, then you actually have something to test against. So, you know, you have some sort of set standard. Whereas, you know, everybody's growing it in their backyard. There's a million ways to grow weed, right? And the plant is a resilient plant. Let's be real. It's a weed, right? So it's nature's finding a way. It's just we've taken, you know, we've wanted to express certain traits around like crop quality and yields and flavor profiles and what have you, you know, that the market demands, right?
Right.
But, you know, by and large, it is a weed. It's going to do what it's going to do, right? So, you know, it's, but the effects of it, like, you know, the same crop from the same, or two different crops from the same grower can be done in two different ways, you know, and have two different results. So in other words, you know, I just want to see a balance in like the ability to find the research and how to cultivate this in a standard fashion with the highest level of efficiency around to produce a consistent result, you know, and then you can start.
I know we'll get there. I know we'll get there, but you know, even setting our standard and expectations lower and just say, let's just get the research done. If there's a study subject we want to study, let there be the research. And if we know that variable going in where the base is slightly altered, okay, we'll take that into account. But as long as there's research being done, that's the starting point we need, you know?
High level, absolutely could not agree with you more. Yeah. I mean, like, let's just get something going. Holy shit, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know? Anyway,
let's transition a bit into the professional career. So describe the beginning of your professional career with cannabis.
Sure, absolutely. So, okay, professionally speaking, I fell into this. So it turns out I you know, went to college. I worked for a large corporation as an advertising sales rep for a publisher. And I was kind of bouncing around from like advertising sales job to advertising sales job, and I ended up getting laid off because there was like a big company purchase and merger acquisition deal, some, you know, stuff way above my level. And since I was the newest man on the totem pole, I was the first one cut. Makes sense, you know. It was a great work environment. I love the people. You know, it is what it is. However, as I'm collecting unemployment, you know, somebody was like, "Hey, you want to make some money under the table, like trimming?" And I was like, "Yeah, you know, since I kind of tacitly and potentially am admitting to a crime, as long as I made under $600, I didn't have to report it." But anyway, so I got into trimming, and it turned out I was a pretty decent trimmer, and I was very punctual and likable because of the years of a sales career. So it's so funny because you show up, you know, like when they're like, yeah, show up at 10 a.m. and we'll get started on you know, room A, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I would show up at 9:50, right, because I've been trained by years of like actually working in the real world that like you get your morning coffee and you take your morning dump before you clock in, right? Like that's right. So that's the professional thing to do, at least, right? But in cannabis world, like 10 o'clock is like 10-ish, you know what I mean? So they were like, "Oh my God, we're not ready for you. You're here too early." But it like set a tone with the growers I was working for that I was like, dude, I'm here for business. Like I'm here to get work done. And
10 means 10. That means 10, you know, before 10, you know, like, yeah.
Yeah. And here's the thing is that people who have follow through and have like people who follow through are I don't want to disparage the industry, but let's be real. Most people got into this because they didn't want to work a day job and they didn't want to pay their taxes, right? So with that, like I stood up, I raised the bar, if you will, amongst what they could expect from an employee.
Mm-hmm.
And so after they found out I could read and write, they're like, hey, do you want to come work for us? Like, you're going to be the guy that's cleaning the Dutch trays to start and, cleaning the 4x8s, and you're going to do a lot of cleaning, right?
Yeah.
And then, so then I painted the fence and I sanded the deck and I waxed the cars. And then they were like, do you want to be a weekend manager? And so then I'm a weekend manager. And then I'm like the day-to-day manager. So, I just sort of started just leveling up, and and then just like any good chef that wants to start their own restaurant, I got the resources together to get into a grow of my own. I had that for a little while, and that was fun. It was, it was like I was running like a 24 lighter, but I was running it by myself. And now that I know what I know, that 24 lighter could have been 16 if I put them on rolling benches. But that's a whole other discussion, right? Yeah. You live and you learn, right? But anyway, so that said, excuse me, the police didn't like that I was doing what I was doing, so they had an issue with it. I was papered up, but like it was weird. We were in like like an industrial bay that had like a bunch of roll-up doors, and some of them were legitimate businesses like cabinet makers and boat refinishers and auto detailers, but in between were a bunch of other grows. And it turned out that like one guy owned 4 units. He was renting 4 units, and his front 2 units were tapping power directly off of the pole, like he was stealing power from the pole.
Ooh.
And his rear 2 units, somehow he got access to the electrical area for the entire building, and they were able to like set up the wiring so that every other unit was trickling power into their units. So they weren't drawing any electricity from the power supply from the city off of these rear 2 units. They were tapping power from all the other units.
Wow.
Right. Very sophisticated.
Yeah.
And with that level of sophistication, unfortunately, I get a call at 6 a.m. from the body shop guy saying, yeah, don't come into work. There's about 6 different agencies here in windbreakers, like busting in all the doors. So I was like, all right, well, I guess that's done. Right. And, I sort of lost my taste for it at that point, because I was like, I'm not built for crime, dude. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I'm just not a good criminal. Yeah. I don't jaywalk, So I have this years of sales career behind me, and it turns out that the guys that I was working for before I started my own grow, one of them started a company, like an automation and control company, where you put a bunch of sensors around the room, it ties back to a web app, and you can start, like the beginnings of Troll Masters and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I worked for a company called Smart Bee Controllers, and they were on par with like Link 4, I would say like the 50 light and under crowd, so a great product. Company went, I worked for them as a sales rep, selling systems to growers. Had a blast doing that, site visits and trade shows and all the good stuff that comes with that. Smart Bee ended up shutting down for a little while to the point where it was not viable for me to work there anymore. And so I moved on to Spectrum King LED, and I got into the LED game. And this was right at the time that people started getting in touch with or started getting connected to the idea of PAR and DLI and PPFD. So, which was funny because when I was at Smart Bee, that was when like vapor pressure deficit started coming into play. So I started selling a lot of systems based on like maintaining VPD. Right. So everybody learns VPD is like, oh my God, I just have to do this. And as long as I'm here, I'm good. I'm cool. Right. So you had your VPD people, like that revelation. And then when I got to Spectrum King, it turned out that the revelation was like right at the time that people started becoming lighting experts all of a sudden, holding up PAR meters and stuff at trade shows. And then I ended up meeting the guys at Filtr while I was working at Smart Bee. They had aspirations to purchase SmartBee at the time, and it got to the phase where I met the principals of the company wanted to meet the staff that they would be getting with the company. So I go into the room, I give them the old razzle dazzle, and turns out they didn't want to buy the company, but a year or two later, they contacted me out of the blue and they're like, "Hey, you remember us?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I remember you guys. You guys were great. I'm sorry it didn't work out." And they're like, "Yeah, we are too, but we invented this, well, not invented, but we developed a HEPA air purifier for the cannabis market space. And we wanted to see if, I don't know what you're doing, but if you were looking to make a change." And I was like, "You didn't even have to put the question mark at the end of the sentence. Yes, I'm down. Let's do this." And it was just a nice compliment because they told me after the fact, like at some point during, I didn't even have to interview for the job. We just went straight to the offer letter conversation,
Love it.
It was a really nice compliment because they said, yeah, they're like, we left that meeting not wanting to buy SmartBee, but we definitely wanted to see if there was a place for you somewhere in our company at some point in the future, and that's why we called you. And I was like, wow, that is,
So that brings us up to that's fantastic, man. I mean, those opportunities and relationships and those people that you meet in the industry, you really they can come to such a big fruition. You really don't know what it'll end up being. So it's like if you keep a good reputation about yourself in this industry, you could grow exponentially, and you could surround yourself with people that you really want to be around.
Are you a cannabis grower looking for reliable and accurate pathogen testing for your plants? Look no further than MyFlora DNA. Their state-of-the-art lab offers testing for hop latent viroid, fusarium, as well as other pathogens that can cause harm to your crops. Trust them to provide you the information that you need to ensure the health of your plants. And for a limited time, use discount code CLONECOACH at checkout for up to 20% off your entire order. Don't let pathogens ruin your crop. Choose MyFlora DNA for all of your cannabis testing needs. Now back to the show.
So that's fantastic to hear. So that really brings us up to your current role and your the company you work with. So what's your current role, and at a high level, what is the company you do?
Sure. Okay, so I work for Filtr. Filtr is a HEPA air purifier. It's a standalone mobile unit. You can wheel it in. You can mount it in a room. It's basically designed to remove particles from the air. It's a capture and removal device. So the basis for that technology comes from the clean room industry. And wouldn't you know it, the manufacturers of Filtr is a company called Lighthouse Worldwide Solutions. So Lighthouse Worldwide Solutions is actually in its 40th year this year of, they supply real-time particle monitoring systems for clean room applications. So think of it, what they do is like a really highfalutin FDA compliant Trollmaster, or an FDA compliant Argus, or one of those those big automation companies. So like in clean room environments, they're measuring different stuff. The reason a clean room is a clean room is because it meets a particular particle level. So it cannot have more than X number of particles at X particle size, and that's how a clean room maintains its classification. So amongst the things that in addition to systems that go into these clean rooms, we also manufacture particle counters, handheld particle counters, which are something that you would use to help sniff out mold problems, or understand the how thick the soup of your air is, if you will. Like if you could see all the particles in the room with the naked eye, you wouldn't be able to see your own computer screen. You know what I mean? Because they're that small, they're that fine. And then we also make things like air samplers as well. Here, I actually happen to have one right here. So this is an air sampler. And this is a device that one would use to be able to find out exactly what is in the air. So you would take something like a Petri dish, right? This is a Petri dish. You would place it on here. You'd put the cover on. And then what it's doing is it's taking a specific amount, a specific volume of air, and impacting that at a specific speed onto the Petri dish. And then you would take that Petri dish, you would cap it, and you would send it off to a lab and have it analyzed. And you can start to figure out what exactly is in your air. So You remember how I was telling you that, like, I mean, high level, right? It's like I hit right at the moment of VPD, and then I hit right at the moment of PAR. Well, now with all the state microbe compliance, microbe compliance is something that like growers never had to worry about. I came from the era of, oh yeah, just cut the moldy part off and put the rest in the turkey bag. It was cool. Back then somebody was going to buy it, right? We didn't really have much of a concern. I mean, mold on a plant really only affected bag appeal.
Yeah, and hence like the kind of meat of the clone talk here. We're talking about the past, the present, and the future. So yeah, I mean, you hit on that in the past. Microbe control. There really wasn't any, right? And like you said, it was only if it was visually that in your face, and you would do something about it. But what are your thoughts on like the exactly that the past and what things used to be like as far as microbe control went?
Well, like, let me put it this way, man. I came from the era, I sprayed Eagle 20. I didn't know any better. There was no research. Nobody told me not to. There was no regulation in place. Shuttle and judo and all that stuff that you have to ask for on the slide behind the counter, that kind of stuff. Like, we didn't know it was just for ornamental flowers and it wasn't meant to be smoked. We didn't know that the reason that, like, you're allowed to use pesticides on outdoor crops is because the UV sunlight is designed to, eliminate the pesticide over time so that it's safe to eat by the time it's picked. We don't know these types of things. Mm-hmm. So, back then it was just like you were growing money trees, right? I mean, there was a time when ounce for ounce weed was worth more than gold.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it was that's the unfortunate part of the past, which is, that wasn't a concern because, like you said, there were money trees, and that other aspect of microbe control just wasn't really at the forefront of concern. Which, take us to today, like you mentioned. Now we're at the cusp of this, microbe control kind of pivot point in the industry, right? So presently speaking, having just a knowledge base of what not to do and what you can do, what products to use and stuff. So what are your thoughts on kind of where the industry is right now as far as microbe control?
Okay, so, honestly, like my biggest competitor is not like Clean Leaf Air or Aero Clean 420 or Aerospy Sage. I don't consider them my competition. My competition is change, fear, the inability to maintain standards, right? Mm-hmm. Like, in other words, the way that this industry is going is that you're going to have to work it like a regular job, where like you have accountability steps and you have auditing trails you have to meet. And, with regard to microbe control, it's like, you really have to adopt more of a clean room level mentality because most of the problems that are entering these facilities are coming in from the people. Like, people are the most dangerous part of a clean room, be it cannabis or making vaccines and dick pills. You know what I mean? Like either way, people are the problem. That's why you have those bunny suit type scenarios. Now, those are not necessarily practical as they apply to cannabis. And on top of the fact that, like, cannabis has a very specific set of microbes that they are not wanting within the area. You know what I mean? Like, right. In other words, like, so depending on your state, I mean, and okay, so here's the thing, okay, like all these people voted for legalization, and then, the voters thought it was going to be raining weed in the streets, right? The growers, every grower I talked to in California when legalization came around, they were all against it, right? And anybody that even read half of the bill would have known that, like, most of the revenue that's generated from the taxation goes into law enforcement to try to pop all the trap houses, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, heaven forbid it goes to, like, school lunches and shit, right? Heaven forbid, right? We care about our people. But in any case, but the thing is that there's a trade-off. Like, okay, you want to operate legally and out in the open, cool. But if the state is going to allow this product to be on a retail shelf, just like any other product, then it's going to have to undergo some sort of like product safety level, a minimum product safety level. You know what I mean? That's got to be the exchange. like, who in their right mind was ever going to think that, like, oh, they're just going to flip the switch on legalization and nothing is going to change in my grow? There's not going to be, like, fire marshals wanting to come in and inspect for sprinklers. There's not going to be, like, building and safety wanting to come in and make sure that things are on the up and up. Heaven forbid, you got to find an accountant now that can, like, process all of your money. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot more that goes into this now. So what I talk to a lot of my clients about, right? Because I go into it, like, do a site visit, or I meet with a client. I bring them a filter. I bring a particle counter. I put the particle counter on the bottom on the intake. I show them a bunch of particles coming out. I put the particle counter on the top. I don't have my particle counter because it's being calibrated back in corporate office, but just pantomime. So then I put a particle counter over the top, and I show, like, an entirely, like, mostly particle reduction, like pretty much at zeros, right? So I can prove that my air filter is working. Like, I can prove that my product meets its claim. And that is something called validation, which is a concept that is really foreign to cannabis. So I find that, let's say I'm in a 2-hour meeting, we talk about 15, 20 minutes about filter, the price of filter changes, and all the logistics and features and benefits that come with that. But then the questions and the context start to get very wide very quickly. So then we start talking about, like, well, how do microbes come in, and how do they travel, and how do they thrive? And a lot of the standards and practices to prevent a lot of that stuff is already developed and already in use in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, as well as the food manufacturing industry. So I tell my clients, I'm like, if you can live somewhere in the neighborhood of pharma at the top end and food production at the bottom end, somewhere in that little window right there, you're more than likely going to be all right. Mm-hmm. So the good news is that a lot of those standards are already in place, and in many cases, there are a lot of, like, little tweaks that you can make along the way. Like, let's say, for example, you have a facility that's got 10 flower rooms in it, right? But what, you're going to take one broom to sweep all of those rooms? No. In food safety and in pharmaceutical manufacturing, every room would have its own tools.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Absolutely.
What you're trying to prevent is cross-contamination. Because you have to remember, like, cannabis, this is the thing that anybody listening to this needs to write down, is that cannabis cares about 1 micron and up. All of your problems related to cannabis are 1 micron and up. And 1 micron is very small. It takes over 25,000 of them to make an inch, right? The mold spore that sets off your outbreak can live in the valleys of your fingerprints. That, you know what I mean? Like, they would have to stack, like, in some cases, they'd have to stack 10 or 20 on top of each other just to see over the ridge of your fingerprint. That's how small we're talking.
Right.
And they don't care how good of a grower you are. They don't care about your political affiliation, your race, your ethnicity, your religion. They don't care. Mold has spent 450 million years being an opportunist. So, and its replication rate is, like, downright evil. You know what I mean? Because one single spore, if it's a mold breed that can reproduce asexually without having to have some sort of exchange with another partner, of the another mold spore or something like that, one spore can rise to produce hundreds, if not thousands, of spores that then shake loose and fly throughout the air, attach to people, attach to your broom, attach to your plants. Like, that's what they do. They just fall and they land, and sometimes they remain in your air indefinitely. So they did a science experiment where they took, like, particles of varying sizes, and they drop it in a 1 meter, because they're metric, because they're scientists, they drop it in a 1 meter tube, a glass tube, where there's no air disturbance, right? And a 1 micron particle, right, the smallest particle size threat that cannabis cares about, a 1 micron particle takes 4.5 hours, almost 5 hours, 4.7 hours, almost 5 hours to fall 1 meter. They drop a 1 micron particle, and it takes 5 hours to do that.
Wow.
So if you think about the way that cannabis facilities are oftentimes constructed, your flower room has fans all over the walls and the ceilings. You have HVAC that's like piped in at like, sometimes like not necessarily even spacing and intervals throughout, your doors are constantly opening and closing. You have people that are walking in that are sticking their hands in the canopy during de-leafing and other plant adjustments. And so there's a lot that can keep these particles just simply aloft in the air almost indefinitely. So the need to be able to remove those particles, just in short, if there's less particles in the space, there's less potential for any of your plants to get contaminated or any of your processes or any of your tools. So, a lot of times, what do they say? Like I always tell a lot of my clients, like, my buddy says ... was great pre-legalization. My buddy says you should do this. My buddy says you should do that. My buddy says that period of my buddy says will now get your room killed or your business will fold, because they didn't have the information back then that they needed compared to the level of information you need now. So in other words, the learning curve has shot up like very steeply. You know what I mean? And so I talked to a lot of growers about like, dude, like a lot of legacy methodologies are just simply, they don't translate to a compliant world,
Exactly. So, I mean, what are some major tips that you could share that for cultivation sites that are, still transitioning or still implementing, all of those cross-contamination protections, or, are just working with what they have usually, right? Like sometimes they're bootstrapped and you don't have the capital yet to redesign or readjust your filters, your inline equipment, or anything like that. So what are some like tips that people could implement today when it comes to the chemistry as far as microcontrol? Because a lot of like tools that get sanitized consistently. So what are some like good tips there that people can start implementing right away?
Okay, so I would say like some of the cheaper solutions around the facility, because it's going to fall under, like, your solution is going to fall under 3 categories, and they're varying levels of these categories. But in general, it's falling under facility retrofits and redesigns, right? Mm-hmm. So there are certain things within the facility physically that you'll need to retrofit. The proper diagnostic and like remediation equipment, so like particle counters and air samplers and, capture and removal filtration, that type of stuff. And then the third thing, which is the hardest one to teach or transition your workers to, is like better cultural practices. So like it falls under those 3 headings, right? Retrofits, proper equipment, proper actions within the facility. So from a retrofit standpoint, some of the things that I might suggest that are relatively low cost might be any exposed wood. If it can't be outright removed, epoxy it over, because mold loves wood, and once mold gets into wood, it is never coming out. So, anything that's wood, I would heavily epoxy over. I would also suggest like, antimicrobial paints, they do, so throwing a new coat of paint on the wall. You might want to call the manufacturer to make sure that it's right for you, so part of that, it helps to know what microbes you absolutely are like non-detect, like pass fail for, and which ones are acceptable. And you just simply call them up and say, hey, can it kill this? Can it get rid of that? Can it do this? Can it do that? And they say, yes, it will handle this one. No, it won't handle that one. Yes, it'll handle this one. So, so antimicrobial paints and coatings are super keen. What else? Filling in all of your cracks in your floor, right, with like a cement filler, and properly sealing your floor, because you have to remember that like the crack in the floor of your facility in your hallway, that crack to a microbe is like the Grand Canyon from a size perspective. Right. You know what I mean? Right. Like, just to kind of put it into perspective, like to present like a visual, if you were a 1 micron particle and you were looking at the edge of a piece of paper, like the part you get a paper cut on, If you were
Mm-hmm.
looking at the edge of the piece of paper, that would be like you in your human size looking up the Empire State Building. So if you've ever,
Wow.
like,
Yeah.
like you walk next to like a really tall skyscraper and you've looked up and you're like, holy fuck
It
all,
just
man, that is tall.
keeps going. Yeah.
Right. That is a mold spore to the very edge, to the edge of a piece of paper.
Wow.
You know what I
Wow.
mean? That's the size we're dealing with. Right. I know. I might as well be telling people to capture ghosts, right?
Yeah.
I get it.
I guess if you call them ghosts, you're the way with your equipment, you kind of are.
Right. Exactly. So understanding that is super helpful. So, when it comes to flooring, for example, seal it however you can. The surface, even the good surface of concrete looks like the landscape of Mars, all rocky and jagged and shit. And,
Right.
microbes can nest in there if not properly cleaned. And then with regard to the floor, something that they do in pharma, if it's feasible at your facility, man, I would do it. What they do is they tend to round out their floors up to their walls.
Mm-hmm.
So, you want to basically remove 90-degree angles from your floors and your walls, because 90-degree angles are where things can accumulate. So what they tend to do in pharma design is they tend to like cove up from the floor to the ceiling, and they tend to bullnose out the corners, round out the corners, because they're easier to mop through.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that middle stage there, as far as like equipment goes, I mean, what can people implement there?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, granted, I might have a horse in this race, but particle counters are a device that can help to, like I said, measure the the particle load in the air. That can help sniff out hot spots within the room once you learn how to read the numbers, which is something that I train all of my clients on. Is, once you start to like use that, you can, like in pharma facilities, it's somebody's whole job to take a particle counter and just go from spot to spot to spot to spot to spot to spot all throughout the facility with a facility map. And they take readings and they take that back to a quality control officer who downloads all the information. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of verifying, being able to implement air sampling, also very helpful in knowing exactly who is at the party. If aspergillus is in your air, you want to know it. Right? You want to be able, these are the tools that are going to help you see this stuff in the air before you see it on your surfaces. So in other words, can we see this stuff with the naked eye? Absolutely not. But you can see it and detect it with instrumentation. So that's how you attack it. You attack it before it hits the viable surface that it's going to be proliferating off of. You want to get it out of the air. So something that facilities can do like currently might be to experiment with increasing the level of filtration in your HVAC system. So to provide a little context to that, HVAC filters most often adhere to what's called a MERV rating, MERV, minimum efficiency reporting value. Mm-hmm. And it's basically a standardized way of being able to quickly assess the performance expectation of that filter. Right. So a MERV 8 filter is going to capture certain sizes particles at certain, in certain percentages of it, but a MERV 10 filter will capture even smaller particles and likely more of them. A MERV 13 filter, it's 5 better than the 8, right? So, but here's the thing you do have to look out for is, number one, does the HVAC system have the slot? Is it big enough to accommodate the filter that you're trying to increase to? Right. The other side of it is your HVAC system powerful enough to be able to accept a thicker filter media and continue to pump out the same cooling power and not overwork the mechanicals? Mm-hmm. So replacing the filters is not a bad idea, but at the same time, it will top out on you. You know what I mean? So it depends on what you did, because a lot of people spec'd in the HVAC system for cooling capacity. They didn't factor for filtration, right? It's only people that are designing facilities now that care about, particle removal.
Right.
So they don't even call it, they're not even referring to it as particle removal. They're just trying to try to capturing more mold, because they know exactly what they're looking for. I'm just saying if it's in the room, get it out of the room. Anything helps. Because here's the other thing too, is that, you have free floating mold spores, but you also have, bacteria that can adhere to larger dust particles that are floating in your air. So E. coli, salmonella are things that are often tested for these guys. And yes, it's more often touch transferred, but if it's going to go through the air, it's going to the same equivalent of us riding a horse. You know what I mean? Like you're going to find something about 10 times your size, you latch onto it, now you're hitching a ride somewhere,
Right.
So when it comes to HVAC filters, just experiment with it and see if you start to experience diminished cooling capacity, if you start to see your numbers rising on your automation equipment or whatever's keeping track of your temperature, then you know that you got to replace it with that lesser filter, unfortunately. And that's where, what Filtr does is that like we're a supplemental air filter. So we don't interfere with HVAC because we're just attacking the particle problem. You know what I mean? That's all we're doing. We don't affect, we have sensors for temperature and humidity to help you out, but we don't affect temperature and humidity. We're just about air exchange.
Understood.
And not only that, but oftentimes, let's say, you do top out when you replace that filter, you're not going to rip out and replace your entire HVAC system. That's not cost effective. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's a decision that should have been made at the design phase when everything was being built. But again, no one really, in a lot of the facilities that were operating, in legacy times that flipped over to legal times, they just continued trucking along with the same equipment,
Yeah.
And I know a lot of growers, they would just remove the filter altogether so they'd get more cooling power,
Yeah, absolutely.
So
lastly, let's touch on the procedures of staff, right? The human aspect of it. Like what are and we're going to be wrapping up the show here shortly as well. So what are the best chemistries to use and how to use them, and some top tips and tricks there when it comes to procedures and chemistries to make sure your surfaces are fully sanitized?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so let's also just make sure, let's backtrack for a second. So the terms sterile, disinfected, sanitized, they actually have very specific meanings. However, they're oftentimes interchangeably used, but they actually do have very specific meanings. So sanitization is really more for like foodborne problems so that you don't get the runs and you don't throw up from a restaurant. So restaurants care about sanitization. Cannabis facilities care about disinfection. So they're going for things like molds and bacterias and stuff that, that is going to be from a compliance standpoint. Whereas sterile means absolutely zero. There's nothing left on that surface after you clean it. So sterilization is a very hard thing to achieve. And not only that, but you don't have to. You just have to kill shit. You know what I mean? Like you just got to kill what you got to kill. So we're talking about disinfection. So when it comes to like selecting disinfectants, you want to make sure that your disinfectant is actually, eliminating the thing that you're trying to kill. The other thing too is something called contact time. So for example, here's a bottle of disinfectant spray, right? Kills 99.9%. Oh, here it is. Yes, kills 99.9% asterisk, right? So you go to the back of it and you look for the asterisks, and it actually tells you on here, leave wet for 30 seconds to kill salmonella. Leave wet for 10 minutes to kill, aspergillus spores or coronavirus or what have you. So there is something called contact time. Yes. So your cleansers have to make sure that you meet the minimum contact time. And not only that, but this is something that is often overlooked, is if your disinfectant dries faster than the contact time needed, you must go back and reapply. You have to keep that surface wet. So intuitively speaking, okay, so chlorine dioxide, great product. Parasitic acid, great product. Hydrogen peroxide, great product. All of those have minimum contact times that need to be met. So that's important. So read your labels, I guess, is the big takeaway from this.
Yeah.
Because if you're not applying a disinfectant correctly, it's not disinfecting. Straight up.
Understood.
The other thing too, mic drop. No. So
there's a lot of good mic drops here, man. Yeah.
Right. So then the other thing too is that every room should have their own tools. Right. So brooms, mops, brushes, scissors, anything. I would also make it a point to purchase color-coded tools, or figure out a way to designate them so that you know that room one's tools are only allowed in room one. And if you see a room one tool in a room two tool, if you see a room one tool in room two, you know that's a cross-contamination hazard, and to be able to get rid of that. Also, proper hand washing technique is essential. There is something called the aseptic hand washing technique that is designed. It's Googleable, aseptic hand washing technique. You can use that. It's actually a way of ensuring that you have complete coverage of your hands before you go in. Remember, those mold spores can live deep in your fingerprints. So also, gloves, very important. I would start to move away from the traditional mops that we see, like the yellow bucket with the squeegee handle, that you roll around. You see them in the gym and the office buildings and the schools. That is like, from a microbe control standpoint, that's like the equivalent of wiping your ass with the same toilet paper twice, because you're taking a dirty mop, you're putting it on a dirty floor, you're putting a lot of faith in that disinfectant in that bucket. You know what I mean? Right. So in pharma and food production, they tend to do like 2 and 3 bucket mop systems where like there's a separate waste or a separate rinse, as you move through your mopping process. Trying to think of what else, from a chemistry standpoint. Oh, I think what might be helpful to know is you actually prefer 70% IPA to 90% IPA, like isopropyl alcohol.
Oh, on the yeah, okay. On the alcohol.
Yeah, so 90%, 99%, that's great for cleaning your bong. You know what I mean? That's great for cleaning your pipe, right? Mm-hmm. But 70% that means it's 70% alcohol, 30% water. So the 30% water allows for a longer wet time, a longer contact time, less, it takes longer for it to evaporate versus 90% or 99%. You know what I mean?
Yeah, good point. Alcohol will evaporate quicker.
Right. The other thing, too, I would also recommend is avoid my buddy says. I would call a manufacturer. They want to talk to you. They want to make sure you're using their product correctly because they want to sell you more of it, right? Like growers that fail for microbe tests don't buy cubes. They go out of business, Right. So everybody's in the business of helping everybody thrive. I took something from a Hyundai salesman that leased me a car years ago where he's like, I'll give you a deal on your first one because I want you coming back for your second one, and I want you getting one for your wife. And when your kids are old enough to drive, I want you coming back to me. I was like, I get that. So a lot of times when I talk to people, it's like, all right, let's work out the kinks in facility 1, because when you build facility 2, and I quote out a bunch of filters and particle counters and air samplers for it, you'll be starting from the beginning, having not making the mistakes you made in facility 1. Yeah, 100%. So. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing too, gowning, head to toe. Our houses, our pillows, our bedding, our pets, our cars are all places where microbes thrive and live. And in the real world, we have no problem dealing with them as we breathe them in and we eat them and what have you. We have no problem ingesting them in the real world. Your plants, however, are like growing flypaper that gets you high. And you have a microbe standard that you have to meet. So the least amount of particle you can allow in, the better. So showering before you go to work, right? Because you take Aspergillus fumigatus in your hair because it comes from your pillows. No trips to the hydro store before you go into your space. If your grow space is in your house, separate clothes, separate shoes. I mean, even commercial facilities. You want a gown. You want to create a barrier between yourself and the plants. 100%. A high concept way to approach it. So those are some of the things that can be done. I mean, I post a lot of tips and tricks on microbe control. So, if you want to follow me on the gram at DyslexicsStoner402, I try to throw in a dick joke to help the medicine go down. I know I'm in the shit that's not easy to explain business. So, try to have a little fun with it where we can.
Absolutely, Jason. There's been a lot of good tips and tricks here, and you're right. That's where I've been following you on Instagram for a while, and you go into a lot of detail when it comes to microbe control. So there's a lot of good value on that Instagram page, and it's DyslexicsStoner402, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, give Jason a follow there. You'll gain a lot of value just by even quietly following him. But get engaged, and ask your questions, because that's how you really get the clarity when it comes to operation.
I welcome questions, man, because like, I mean, on one hand, yeah, like, I want to sell more filters. Don't get me wrong. I have kids and a wife, right? But like at the same time, like I want to build your confidence as a grower. And this is like this last like final frontier where a lot of growers are like really uneasy and they don't even know where to start asking questions. And I get a lot of panic calls and it's like, dude, like I spend most of my time like chilling people out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I get it.
And I get it. I get it. I grew too. I know all those pain points. I just wasn't held accountable to them in the time that I was growing.
Right. I love it, Jason. Well, look, we're at the very end of our show here. We got one more question to ask that we're going to be asking all of our guests just to kind of get a little kind of paint the picture on what you think the future is going to be like for cannabis. So we'll get a quick answer to this question here. Factoring in technology, the global economy, politics, what do you think the future of cannabis looks like around the world?
I think it looks bright. I don't know that it will meet all these projections of like $20 billion industry globally. I don't know about that. I don't care about any of that. What I do know is that societally speaking, we're getting a lot less uppity about cannabis. We're starting to see the medicinal value. We're starting to see the financial value. We're starting to see the import-export value. And we're starting to see a lot of jobs that are created along the way in an industry that was previously demonized in a lot of areas of the world.
I love it, and I agree with you, man. This nothing but bright future looking ahead of us, so I'm excited for it. Well, Jason, thank you very much for joining us today on Clone Talk. There was a lot of good snippets in there, a lot of good value that was shared. So everybody go give Jason a follow on Instagram, Dyslexic Stoner 402. And lastly, where can they find out more about your filters and stuff?
Sure. You can go to www.filtrscience.com. That's FILTR. You're like, where's the E? It's like I keep sucking it up. I don't know. It's that good, right? But filterscience.com. I made them by FILTER as well. So nice. if you misspell it, you'll still get to us. But, I'm the rep. My territory is Earth. So, feel free to reach out to me with filter questions through my IG account as well.
Awesome. Great, Jason. We'll link all of those links in the show notes as well. Make sure everybody has access to that. But thank you for everybody for joining us today on Clone Talk. If you're ready to make the best clones ever as well, head on over to clonecoach.com where I offer expert guidance and step-by-step instructions for both mother plants and clones to get you the best clones ever. And that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you.
Attention licensed operators in California. Are you looking for high-quality nursery stock? Look no further than Refined Genetics. They provide top-notch clones, teens, and seeds to ensure the success of your operation. No order is too big. For a limited time, use discount code CloneCoach for 10% off your first order. Don't miss out on this opportunity to secure a solid nursery partner. Contact sales@refinedgenetics.co. And yes, it's .co, not .com. Catch you on the next episode of Clone Talk. Do you want to be a guest on Clone Talk? It's easy. Just send me an email. heyclonecoach@gmail.com. We'll get you all set up. I look forward to having you on the next episode.